Hi, everybody. It's Eric Murray from SugarHuddle.com. Well, conference championship game weekend is upon us in college football, of course, week 14. And obviously, it's time for my weekly college football pick six picks. I've decided for this week, with the conference title games in mind, that I'm going to pick the Power 5 conference championship games, as well as the top Group of 5 game, which, of course, involves the number 8 ranked UCF Knights, who are undefeated, 24-game winning streak, trying to extend that, trying to sneak into the playoffs. So, anyways, I want to go over these 6 games, and there's one game tonight, the Pac-12 title game, and then the 5 games on Saturday. So obviously I'm going to be posting the video here a little bit early, and I'm going to have this up obviously before the Pac-12 title game starts later. So anyways, I want to go over these 6 games. I'm going to do it in order of the times that these games play. I also want to kind of talk a little bit about the playoffs themselves, and maybe even kind of throw in some Heisman talk as well. So anyways, first of all, tonight's game, like I said, is Pac-12 title game. Number 17, Utah, 9-3, versus number 11, Washington, who's also 9-3. UW's a 5.5-point favorite. That game's in Santa Clara, 8 p.m. on Fox. Saturday, you have the Big 12 title game. That's a noon start time, ABC. That's in Arlington, Jerry World. Number 14, Texas, 9-3, looking to beat their arch rival, number 5, Oklahoma, for a second time this year. OU is 11-1. OU's actually a 7.5-point favorite, even though Texas obviously beat them last time around. Sorry about the lighting, by the way. I know my face looks weird with this light. So, but anyways, AAC championship game, the UCF game. 8-4 Memphis plays 11-0 UCF, number 8 team in the country. UCF, that's their 3-point favorite, so my adjusted line makes them a 3.5-point favorite, so they'll have to win by more in the field goal. 3:30 ABC start time. SEC title game, number 1 Alabama, undefeated, obviously, 12-0, defending national champs. They're a 13.5-point favorite over number 4 Georgia, who's 11-1, trying to get in the playoffs. 4 p.m. on CBS. ACC title game and the Big Ten title games are both 8 p.m. games. ACC's on ABC and the Big Ten is on Fox. The ACC game, number 2 Clemson, 12-0. They're a 27.5-point favorite over unranked Pitt, who's 7-5, just lost to Miami. And Big 12 and the Big Ten title game, number 21 Northwestern, 8-4. They take on Ohio State, ranked number 6, trying to get an impressive win for the playoff committee. Obviously, coming off the big win over then number 4 Michigan, who's now number 7. Anyways, number 6 OSU is 11-1, 14.5-point favorite in that one. So, anyways, when I'm picking overall winners this year, so far I'm 32-34. Spread, I had a real tough week last week. I think I was 1-5, so that drops me to 10 games below 500, 28-38. Remember, I'm going to pick all the bowl games, so that is either going to help me or is really going to kill me on the season. We'll find out when we get to that. But anyways, when I want to go down the line and make these picks, I've got Washington beating Utah tonight, 30-21. Obviously, that would mean Washington would also cover. I got OU beating Texas, 41-35. It's going to be fairly similar to the first game, but in this case, OU is going to get the win and probably get in the playoff unless Georgia beats Alabama. And in this case, so Texas would cover. UCF, I have them beating Memphis 34-28, so obviously they will win and cover. Obviously, they've got their backup quarterback now because of Mackenzie Milton's injury. Alabama, I think they won't cover, but they will win 27-17 over Georgia. Obviously, they've had some good matchups in the past. Remember that 2012 SEC title game, down the wire game. Clemson, I have them actually covering against Pitt 48-17. That's one where Pitt could easily cover because it's such a big spread, but I just think Clemson in these conference title game settings is just a little bit too good. Pitt's, 7-5 for what it's worth. And Ohio State Northwestern, I actually do think Northwestern is going to keep it close, and I have Ohio State barely beating them 27-20. So I'm going to go down the line, obviously, in order of when these games play and kind of break them all down. So a lot of these, about half of these games, the teams playing each other in these championship games play each other at some point this year, including obviously like the Texas-Oklahoma Red River shootout or rivalry or whatever the hell they call it these days. Always changing the last part of that shootout, rivalry, showdown, blah, 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 whatever, Red River something. But anyways, Pac-12 title game, UW and Utah actually played each other in the conference opener for both teams. That was back in mid-September, September 15th, and Washington won at Utah 21-7. So they were able to take them down early in the year. And Washington scored a touchdown in each of the first 3 quarters. So it was a 7-7 game, and they were able to score in the second and third quarters and take control of the ball game. Not a real eventful game, not really a whole lot of great highlights. I went back and did the research on it and checked it out again. watched a whole bunch of highlights, and there really aren't a whole lot of highlights to talk about. But in that game, Jake Browning, who of course just came off of that terrific game, that terrific win over Washington State last week, upsetting WSU in the Apple Cup. He played great in that game, but he's been very, very hit or miss and up and down all year long. The senior, very accomplished career at Washington, criticized a lot this year, and his Utah game was no exception. He was just 14 of 24, buck 55, touchdown, interception. So decent enough, but nothing really special. What really set UW apart in this one was really their running game. Myles Gaskin, who of course was huge in that Washington State game, had that 80-yard touchdown run, did a great job against the Cougars on the road in the snow. In this one, earlier in the year, he had 30 carries, a buck 43, and a touchdown. As a team, they had 173 and 2 scores. I want to say Browning might have had the other score on a very short run, like a sneak maybe. But anyways, Aaron Fuller, who's his go-to receiver, who's got a lot of catches this year, he had 6 catches, 108 yards, which means, if you look at the stats, that means everybody else had 8 catches for, 47 yards combined and a touchdown. So they really relied heavily on those two guys, and they rely heavily on those two guys, obviously, in a lot of games this year. So certainly for Utah, who's got a pretty decent defense, pretty good defense, they've played well lately, they're definitely going to have to find a way to somehow shut down Gaskin and Fuller, because if they do that, they've got a great shot in this one. And Utah themselves, at the time, Tyler Huntley was still their quarterback, and obviously I'll get to in a second why he's not anymore. At the time, he was okay, 20 of 38, buck 38 in interceptions, so not real great. But he had 29 Utah had 29 carries for 123 and a touchdown. So you look at those numbers, well under 300 total yards as a team. Huntley didn't do anything. The running game did absolutely nothing. And Britton Covey, who's their go-to receiver, he has a lot more catches and yards than the second, third guy on their team. He had 8 catches for 54 yards, nothing real special. So, you have one team that relies heavily on a couple of guys on offense. Those guys flat out got it done in this game. Another that relies on one or two guys with their offense, and they, whatever reasons, couldn't get it done. And what Washington was able to do against Washington State was so impressive last week. And I know the snow hurts, the offenses a little bit, but what they were able to do against Washington State was so impressive, and the defense is playing real good. Like I said, Utah's playing pretty decent right now too, but I think it's going to be tough for Utah to have much more success, or lack thereof, that compared to the first time. I don't know if things change much. Still going to be a pretty close competitive game, but you look at it, third downs, Utah almost had 50% conversion, 9 of 19. UW was only 5 of 13 in this game, but Utah was 0 for 3 on third downs. They actually, their last 3 drives, they went for it and turned it over on downs. Each of their last 3 possessions. Utah had 3 turnovers. UW just had the 1 interception, so that obviously was a huge thing there. Total yards, like I said, 327 for Washington, 261 for Utah. Washington time of possession, 33-11. Utah's won 7 of 8 since September 29th. They lost the next week to Washington State to get swept by the Washington schools, and then since that loss, right after the UW loss, they've won 7 of 8. So if you include that next week, they've won 7 of 9 since the Washington game. So they're doing a pretty good job, even if their offense isn't super efficient or super powerful. But anyways, I mentioned the quarterback situation. Huntley, he got injured a few weeks back in the Arizona State game, got knocked out of the game in the second half. And so that forced Jason Shelley, who's a redshirt freshman, 5'11", buck 95, to become the guy. And they're actually 3-0 with him. But like Huntley, he's not going to put up the real gaudy numbers. Dual threat type quarterback, probably a little bit more runner than passer. In that, overall right now, he's only completing 56.3% of his passes, 3 touchdown passes, but just 1 interception, 723 yards. Also has 159 rushing yards and 3 scores. So, finding ways to kind of help this team move the football. Covey on the year 59 for 631 and a touchdown. So that's all he has is 1 receiving touchdown. Samson Nakua has a team high 5. So not really a whole lot of unbelievable playmakers. Like I said, this is a Utah offense that's not going to blow your mind. They've certainly had some much better offenses in the past. But really, recent years, Utah hasn't been real gaudy offensively for the most part. They've been a defensive-minded team that does just enough offensively to earn some victories. So, yeah, as usual, Kyle Willingham, who would make a great USC coach, but obviously that's not going to happen. It just finds a way to keep or Kyle Whittingham. I'm sorry, I think I said Willingham. Kyle Whittingham does a really terrific job there at Utah for a bunch of years now, and got to give him a lot of credit. He's been doing an excellent job, and one of those teams that they're not sexy the way they win these games, but they win the games. That's all that really matters. So, anyways, again, Utah can shut down Fuller and Gaskin. They're gonna have an opportunity there. Big 12 title game. Obviously, we remember that game. Texas back in the Cotton Bowl midseason won that game 48-45. Remember, Oklahoma was trailing by 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, stormed back and tied it, and then the freshman Dicker, the kicker as they call him, had the walk-off field goal at the end to win 48-45. And that was a game that Sam Ehlinger, like he has a lot this year, really balled out for Texas. He was 24-35, 314, and 2 scores. But on the ground, he had 19 carries, 72 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So he kind of did his best Tim Tebow impression in that one. Per usual, his wideouts, Lil Jordan Humphrey and Colin Johnson, they both also had exceptional games. Humphrey had 9 catches, 133 yards, and a touchdown. Also had 2 short passes that he completed for 10 yards and a short touchdown pass. Colin Johnson had 6 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. The main thing, though, for at the time, Texas was still playing some defense, even though obviously in this game they gave up a whole bunch of points. But they had 3 takeaways in this one, and that was kind of the difference because I believe Texas only had 1 turnover, but Oklahoma had 3 turnovers, 2 lost fumbles, and an interception. And so that was kind of a big difference in this one. That's how Oklahoma got themselves in a hole. Kyler Murray, it wasn't his greatest effort, even though the final numbers were impressive. He was 19 of 26, 304, 4 touchdowns and a pick, but the pick was costly. He also lost a fumble. He had 11 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown. He had a really amazing touchdown run that was the beginning of their comeback there in the fourth quarter. As a team, they had 31 carries, 222, and 2 scores. Hollywood Brown, 9 catches, 131 yards, and a couple touchdowns, including a 77-yarder. CeeDee Lamb, 6 for 75 and a touchdown. So when you look at it, both teams have amazing wide receiver combos. We know it's Big 12. There's not a whole lot of defense being played. So which wide receiver tandem is going to step up the most? You figure the quarterback battle is going to be fairly even. I don't think Ehlinger is going to get outplayed much in this game, especially going against that Oklahoma defense. But which receiver tandem is really going to have the upper hand? And it's going to be interesting because Hollywood Brown is the best of those 4. But you could definitely argue that perhaps Humphrey and Johnson of Texas are maybe a slightly better all-around receiving duo. It's a toss-up. So that's going to be really, really interesting to see what guys really step up in that one and which defenses step up. You'd think it would be Texas, but who knows because they haven't been so great lately either. And speaking of which, OU, not surprisingly, their offense has obviously been terrific, 50.3 points per game. But their defense, which is allowing like 32 on the year, they've been giving up way more lately. They're giving up 40-plus in 4 straight games and 5 of 7, which started back with that Texas game midseason. They've also had 4 one-score victories along the way. Their number one offense averages 583.6 yards, 583.8 yards per game, my bad. So basically 600 yards a game and just under 9 yards a play. Their defense, though, is ranked 111th in the country. The Sooners allow 449 yards per game and 6 yards a play, which isn't horrible, but obviously not good either. But the last 4 games have really been killer. They've allowed 179 points, like I said, 40-plus in all 4 of those games. So you do the math, that's 44.9 per game, and they allow 585.25 yards per game. So they allow more yards per game in the last 4 games than they average per season. They average a ton of yards per game, obviously, like I just mentioned, number one offense in the country, and they're giving up even more yards in the last 4 games. They allowed 704 against West Virginia, 524 against Kansas, 640 against Oklahoma State, and 473 against Texas Tech. But the flip side is they found a way to win those games. And that's why a lot of people think Kyler Murray should win the Heisman. I still think it should be Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama, who I'll talk about in a few minutes here. But, it's hard to argue against Murray because if he can beat Texas, that's a redemption victory, beats the only team that's, that he lost to all year long, and probably gets them into the playoff. Obviously, there's going to be a couple factors that play into that. Probably gets them in the playoff. We'll see. But anyways, it's going to be a great game. And then, of course, UCF AAC championship game. They've had all these double-digit wins, all these runaway victories, but yet when they played Memphis, in Memphis, in the Liberty Bowl, October 13th. They only beat them by a point, 31-30. They actually trailed 30-14 late in the first half. 30-17 was the halftime deficit, and they ended up scoring 17 unanswered, and obviously shutting out Memphis in the second half. Their average margin of victory in their other 10 wins, by the way, for UCF is 25.9. So, 259 points. They outscored their opponents in those games. Second half possessions, though, for Memphis, this is the thing killed them. Their offense just completely disappeared in the second half. It went punt, 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 fumble, fumble, punt, punt, and then the last possession, their most successful in the second half, was end of game. They ran out of time and couldn't, get in position to kick a field goal or nothing. They had five plays, 54 yards in a minute and a half, but they couldn't position themselves to win that ball game. And so, anyways, including that last possession, they ran 34 plays for 160 yards in the second half. But if you disclude that final drive, they had 29 plays for 106 leading into that, which is obviously absolutely nothing. UCF, the way they got back into it, Taj McGowan, he had a 71-yard touchdown run that made it 30-24. And then Milton, who obviously won't be playing this game, 7-yard touchdown run with 12:14 to go, and that made it 31-30. In the game, Milton was 17 of 29, 296 on the score. He had, negative 11 rushing yards because of sacks and what have you, but he had that touchdown, so that was a big thing. As a team, they had 37 for $165 and 3 scores. Gabriel Davis, he had 6 receptions, $128 and a touchdown, long reception there. And then for Memphis, Brady White, who has 25 touchdowns, 7 picks on the year. He had an okay game, 17 of 29, 209, nothing real special. As a team, though, Memphis, they have a great running game, 52 carries, 281, and 3 scores. Darrell Henderson, who is second in the country in yards per game, and touchdowns, 5th in yards per attempt. He had 31 carries, $199, and a touchdown this one. On the year, he has 1,699 yards, 19 rushing touchdowns, and 8.6 yards per attempt. South Florida, they had a little bit of success against UCF running the ball last week, but it kind of faded pretty quickly, and UCF was able to eventually shut it down fairly quickly. So South Florida had moments where they had some runs here and there. So Memphis, you're going to have to break a couple of those runs for touchdowns. Brady White's going to have to step it up. And obviously it's going to be interesting on the other side, UCF, because now you got your freshman backup quarterback in there. He was okay last week, but he's going to have to probably do a little bit more. And UCF's defense, who has been criticized for not being a real great defense, last couple of games, Cincinnati, South Florida were great matchups for them. Memphis is a different team, though. Their offense likes to spread you out. So is this secondary and this all-around defense that's been so fantastic the last couple of games, can they replicate it against a much different offense? So Memphis is going to give themselves an opportunity, but I just think that UCF, they've come this far. I don't think they're going to lose now. And the fact that they have the familiarity playing Memphis once already, I think that's going to help them a lot as well. SEC title game, obviously. Bama, a lot of people expect them to win this game. They're favored by a couple of touchdowns. Georgia, certainly, rematch of last year's national title game. We'll give them a run for their money, of course. Tua, like I said, is he the Heisman winner? He had 5 touchdown passes against Auburn last week. Not really enough to constitute a Heisman moment, though, because even though it's your arch rival, Iron Bowl, and we know some of the great Iron Bowls in recent years, Alabama was like a 25-point favorite in that one, and Auburn's really not that great this year. So he's going to have to really have a big performance in this one to ensure the Heisman. Doesn't have to have a bigger performance to win the game, but as far as his own personal Heisman quest, if he can have a big game against Georgia, he could really lock up his Heisman thing, even if Murray wins his game. On the year, he's completing over 70% of his passes. Obviously, he went a long time before he threw a pick. Just 2 interceptions now, 36 touchdowns, 2 picks, 18-1 touchdown to interception ratio there. 3,189 yards, 11.9 yards an attempt, 212.51 rating. I haven't looked it up. I know Baker Mayfield holds a record for highest single-season rating in college football history, is well over 200. But Tua's definitely got to be pretty close. He's, statistically, he's up there. So if he has another huge game, who knows? Obviously, he's got a few games left if they can win a national title. So, we'll see. But anyways, he also has 211 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns. Didn't really use his legs a ton earlier in the year, but as the year has gone on, he's used his legs more when he needs to, and he's done a great job with that. We saw it against LSU, and I believe he also did that a little bit against Auburn. Their offense obviously is great. Almost as good as Oklahoma's. They average 49 points per game. Tua barely plays in the fourth quarter. Defense only allows 13.8. Jerry Jeudy, 56 receptions, 1,079, 11 scores. Henry Ruggs has 10 touchdowns himself. They averaged about 206 rushing yards a game, allowed just 114, so they outgained their opponents by about twice as many yards on the ground. Their defense, of course, another NFL defense, a lot of talent there. 14 interceptions, 21 total takeaways, plus 10 turnover margin, 40 sacks. They've only allowed 11, so Tua a lot of time to throw. Georgia's going to have to get after him. Isaiah Buggs, who's been fantastic this year, 9.5 sacks. Quinton Williams, who's been just as good as anybody, 7 sacks. A lot of people like him. And Christian Miller has 7.5. So, you look at that trio, I mean, that's 24 sacks between 3 guys alone. Georgia, they've won 5 straight, so they've looked good since that LSU loss. They beat Florida and Kentucky along the way. Very impressive, and both those wins, blowout victories. They themselves average 40.1 points per game, allow 17.2. As we all know, of course, Kirby Smart, the former Alabama defense coordinator for all those years. He's been the Georgia coach for a few years now, almost beat him in the title game last year. So obviously they'll have that confidence from last year going up big early on in that championship game. It was, I believe, 13-0 at the half. But then, of course, Tua came in, played the second half, and lit it up and then beat him in overtime. So obviously now Tua, the full-time guy, and all his experience and on his way to Heisman, it'll be interesting to see how Georgia responds this time. Because remember, against LSU, Jake Fromm, he had trouble kind of connecting with his receivers. His timing wasn't real great. And, of course, defensively, they got shredded against LSU, and LSU was able to run all over them. And, even Joe Burrow, who hasn't done that much this year, was able to have some success against them. So Georgia's defense is definitely going to have to step up as much as their offense. Fromm himself, though, 2,236 yards, 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So he's been very efficient. Those are numbers that previous Alabama quarterbacks, obviously he was a Georgia quarterback, but previous Alabama quarterbacks would put up those types of numbers. So he's probably going to have to do a little bit more in this one. Main thing, though, is going to be their running game. They're amazing at running the ball, 260 yards a game approximately. Of course, DeAndre Swift, Elijah Holyfield have been a great tandem. Swift has 962 yards, 9 scores. Holyfield, 896 with 7 touchdowns. Both of them a little under 7 yards a carry, about 6.8 or so per carry on average when you combine their stats. They've gotten almost identical carries. So, Georgia's done a nice job balancing that out. And then, of course, Georgia's defense, they're a defense that obviously is physical and does a real nice job, but they only have 20 sacks, and they've allowed 16. So Tua, because he's only been sacked 11 times all year, Georgia's defense is going to have to find a way to find a couple of extra sacks. They've only allowed 11 touchdown passes, but they only have 6 interceptions, so they don't have a huge amount of takeaways. So when you're playing a quarterback that doesn't turn over, doesn't get sacked, has some mobility, obviously they have a strong running game, how do you counter that? So that's why, Fromm's going to have to step it up a little bit. In the Georgia running game, they're going to have to play keep away. They're going to have to find a way to somehow have a big game against Alabama's defense and keep Bama's offense off the field, because Georgia, I don't think they want to get into a shootout like what last year turned into in the second half. They want to try to kind of keep the score within that, like a 30 to 27, 27-24 type margin. If it starts to get into the 30s and 40s, I think even though they average 40 points a game, I don't think Georgia's offense really wants to get into that, and their defense certainly doesn't either. ACC title game, this is the one that everybody expects it to be a blowout. We know Pitt won at Clemson in the regular season a couple years ago. That was Clemson's only loss en route to their national title in 2016. But, this Pitt team's not quite as good. They're 7-5. They're coming off of a blowout 24-3 loss at Miami. Pitt's a team that they pride themselves on running the football. On the year, 232.7 yards a game and 28 touchdowns. But against Miami, 38 carries for 69 yards, 1.8 yards a carry. That's not going to get it done. Kenny Pickett is just a glorified game manager like other quarterbacks that Pat Narduzzi's had at Pitt, as well as quarterbacks that he had as a defense coordinator at Michigan State. Just 12 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions, 152.1 yards per game. So 150 passing yards per game and 1 touchdown per game on average. It's not going to get the job done. If you're going to have any chance of beating Clemson with that great defensive line led by Cleveland Farrell, his 10.5 sacks, 43 sacks as a team, just 13 allowed, by the way, for Clemson's offense. You're going to have to do a lot more than that, because they allow less than 85 rushing yards per game, just 7 rushing touchdowns all year, 2.2 yards per carry. So we saw what happened for Pitt's offense against Miami's defense. Now you're playing Clemson, who's even better. how are you going to get it done? Kenny Pickett, had that surprise game against Wake Forest, had a huge career day a couple weeks back, but remember, that's Wake Forest. They're not Clemson. Clemson obviously killed Wake Forest not that long ago. It's going to be a tough one. Clemson, they had a couple of one-score victories early in the year, a couple of down-the-wire games, and guess what? In the last 7, it's been all double-digit, type wins, or at least more than one-score wins. Trevor Lawrence, of course, had a terrific year, 22 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Travis Etienne, who some people thought was kind of a dark horse Heisman, 164 carries, 1,307 yards, 8 yards an attempt, or just under 8 yards. I think it might be 7.97, something like that. We just call it 8. It's close enough. 19 rushing touchdowns, so he's right up there nationally in a lot of areas, doing a great job. And Pitt, it's like you got to stop their passing game, you got to stop their running game, and then you also have to keep up offensively. How are you going to do that? And I'm not sure that Pitt can. That's why they're such a huge 4-touchdown underdog, and I think Clemson will find a way to cover. Clemson, by the way, speaking of their running game, 42 rushing touchdowns, so just unbelievable stuff there. And then another championship game that's going to be interesting, because you ask yourself, how does one team keep up with the other, is this Big Ten title game, because Northwestern, offensively, they can't do a whole lot. Clayton Thorson, their quarterback, who's an NFL prospect, doesn't have any weapons. He's been sacked 29 times, and Northwestern's defense only has 17 sacks. He has 14 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, so he's been baited into some mistakes. He can run around, he's got some mobility, but 223 passing yards per game, okay. 60.5% completion percentage, not real great, just 6.4 yards per attempt. As a team, they average just 115 rushing yards per game, not even. And they only average 23.7 points per game. They're 0-2 versus ranked opponents. They are 5-0 as far as road and neutral site games this year. All their losses are at home, but all their tougher games have been at home too. So you have to kind of factor that in. So in Indianapolis, indoors, that fast track against those Ohio State athletes. Can Ohio State do those crossing routes like they did against Michigan? Can their fast receivers really make life hard on Northwestern's pass defense? Because Northwestern, them and Ohio State both give up about the same amount of passing yards per game. Northwestern, I think it was like 236, 237 a game. And Ohio State, 237.6. Ohio State's defense, in a lot of ways, has turned into a Big 12 defense. They really can't stop anybody, but they're playing an offense that doesn't do a whole lot. So, Northwestern is scrappy. They play you tough. They play you close, and they find ways to win games. And that's why I think it's going to be a tight game. Wouldn't be shocked if they even lead in the second half at one point, because Ohio State in a lot of these Big Ten title games, outside of that 59-0 win in 2014 over Wisconsin, Ohio State in these Big Ten title games, they've had some trouble. They lost to Michigan State back in, I believe that was 2013. Even last year against Wisconsin, they got off to a big start. Looked like they were going to blow them out a second time. And what happens, Wisconsin had a chance to win the final possession, and some incompetent quarterback play sunk them. And that could be the case in this one too. Clayton Thorson, if he's a little bit incompetent down the stretch, that could force a Northwestern loss. But Ohio State, Dwayne Haskins, obviously, he's had a big year. Now he's back in the Heisman conversation. 6 touchdown passes against Michigan. Michigan had the number 1 defense in the country at the time. They obviously put up 62 points in that win, 101 combined points in that game. Set a Big Ten record now. Has 42 touchdown passes on the year, has over 4,000 yards, 69% completion percentage. The thing that impressed me about that Michigan game, just to go back to that real quick, is all year long he's been doing a lot of dinking and dunking, so that's why it's hard to be real impressed with him as A, an NFL prospect, and as B, as a Heisman contender, especially some of the teams he's gone against. But going against a team like Michigan, he was throwing it down the field left and right. I mean, he was torching that secondary. He's getting aggressive down the field, vertical. And so, it'll be interesting to see if Ohio State goes to that same strategy, because if their play calling gets a little shoddy again, so to speak, and they start to dink and dunk again, the Northwestern should be able to find a way to really shut it down and definitely keep it a close game. Ohio State, like I said, their defense isn't very good. They allow 161.25 yards per game and 22 touchdowns. Their offense has less rushing touchdowns, 21, and 181.4 rushing yards a game, which is a decent number, but they're a team that they kind of expect like 250 yards per game on their offense. So Ohio State, they're wildly inconsistent running the ball. That'll help Northwestern's defense, and Northwestern's offense can't run the ball that well, but they're going against an Ohio State defense that isn't really all that. So that'll help them somewhat. But the main thing is Ohio State, I mentioned all the sacks Northwestern gives up. Ohio State has 34, and that's even without Nick Bosa for most of this year. And they've only given up 16 because they do a good job of getting rid of the ball quick. So Northwestern's not going to really get any sacks on them. Just kind of forcing Haskins to throw underneath, not letting those athletic receivers get out in space and make the huge plays like we saw Wisconsin last year. That's going to be a big thing. And yeah, if you're Northwestern, you got to get takeaways. You got to bait Haskins into a mistake or two. We know Ohio State's heavily penalized. Northwestern is very, very lightly penalized. So you got to use that to your advantage. You didn't use it to your advantage in the Notre Dame loss because Notre Dame was able to counter you. This might be something you can take advantage of. So we'll see. But anyways, for the most part, should be 6 pretty interesting conference championship games. So obviously, I'll get back to you in the next couple of days and go over all those games, and we'll see what it could mean for the playoff, which of course is going to be on Sunday. Maybe I'll make a video about that. I don't know, but anyways, take care.